Chapter 6 from the Book of Fairy Tales, A Secret and a Promise. Hades was still in the Odd Sisters' house, waiting rather impatiently for them and Circe to return from the fairylands. "Where are those devilish women?" he asked, no one but himself as he poked around, looking at their books, peeking into their cabinets, and riffling through their drawers. He spied an interesting collection of teacups, all of them different from one another, and it made him laugh. He had read in the Book of Fairy Tales and the Odd Sisters' journals what could be done with teacups, and thought how much he liked the way these devilish witches' minds worked. He also spied an assortment of treasures, just tucked away behind the jars of tea and mismatched cups, and wondered who the poor souls were who had originally been the owners of these items, again laughing, because he had a feeling those items would likely be cursed in the future. That was, if they hadn't been already. He made a mental note to himself to go back through the Book of Fairy Tales and keep an eye out for anyone who was wearing those items. It was interesting getting to know the Odd Sisters in this way, reading about them and having their house all to himself so he could snoop around alone and undisturbed. At least he thought he was alone, until the beautiful cat had seen in the window came slinking into the room through a little door that led in from the back garden. She had little bits of leaves, flower petals, and twigs in her fur, and spiderwebs tucked on her whiskers, like she had been rummaging around doing cat-like things, even though she didn't seem very cat-like to Hades. And he wondered if she wasn't someone who had offended the witch goddess Circe and had been turned into a cat. "Hello, Hades," she said, blinking her yellow eyes and adjusting her two front paws, one right after the other, before she started cleaning her face with one paw. It was Florence, the Odd Sister's cat. Hades had read about her and found her to be an amusing and formidable character. He had a sense she was no ordinary cat, if she was a cat at all. He could feel the great power within her, but this creature seemed to keep her secrets to herself. And, according to the Book of Fairy Tales, it was clear she was fiercely protective of her witches. She reminded him of a goddess he hadn't seen in a very long time, and he wondered, silently, who this cat really was. "Hello, Florence. I'm waiting for your witches. Circe said it was okay." "You didn't bring cake," the cat said, blinking her eyes at him again. He snapped his fingers and conjured a cake, making it appear on the kitchen table. It was round and covered in dark chocolate frosting, and had a raspberry filling. "Hopefully this will do," he said, smirking at Florence. "You seem like the sort of god who likes secrets. If I tell you one, will you make me a promise?" This took Hades by surprise. He was almost sure Florence had heard his thoughts. He was intrigued. He had a feeling she was going to tell him who she really was. It was too irresistible to pass up. "That depends on the promise and the secret. Is it juicy?" Hades had a feeling it was, or he wouldn't be bothering with a talking cat. For all he knew, all the animals in this kingdom talked, but he didn't know there was something very different about this creature. He leaned in closely as Florence whispered the secret into his ear. "Oh, I knew it. That is a good one," he said. "Do your witches know?" "They don't, but Circe does, and I'd prefer to keep it that way until the proper time." "That's fair. So what's this promise? I suppose you want to whisper it into my ear as well?" he asked, leaning in again. "Okay." And the moment he heard it, he decided the bargain was worth it. With one small addendum, it's a deal, but I need one more thing from you before we seal it. Tell me, why the Odd Sisters and Circe are at this fairy exam, or whatever she called it. Why is this dark fairy so important to them?" The Odd Sisters are aligning the cosmos to ensure Maleficent transforms into a dragon and destroys the fairylands, as it is foretold in the Book of Fairy Tales. Ah, and I suppose it doesn't hurt to have the great witch goddess Circe there to help them. I see they didn't need my help getting revenge on the fairy godmother. Good for them. So how do I find the fairylands? The fairy godmother won't welcome you in her lands, said the cat, her eyes flashing in the sunlight coming through the stained glass windows. That's not a problem, he said, stretching out his arms and turning himself into a crow, with a long, sharp beak and striking black feathers tinged with blue. She won't know it's me. Take to the sky and feel for the witch's vibrations.
Mommy?
Follow them until you find the Odd Sisters.
I'm done watching in
Okay.
something on the TV.
Okay, Flance said, adjusting her white paws.
Oh, yeah.
They reminded Hades of his little...
Mommy,
of-
I'll sit next to you and Quinny.
Okay, of fat little marshmallows. Good kitty. With a wave of his wing, he conjured a saucer of milk for her before opening the front door with his magic. He hopped, as birds do, over the threshold, spreading his wings, and took flight, soaring into the clouds.
Too much.
Yep, letting out a loud call of thanks. He could see Flans below. Yep, below, getting smaller as he ascended above the clouds, and he wondered how long it would take before he had to fulfill his promise to Flans. If he had any doubts about the Odd Sisters' ability to split his fate string, they were not now completely obliterated. These witches had the power to direct the cosmos. He was going to call in his favor, and together they were going to destroy his brother Zeus. He was not. Hades flew higher and higher, soaring in and out of clouds. The view of the many kingdoms was astounding. He felt for the witch's vibrations, but something distracted him. The vibrations of another witch, a witch he didn't know. Her vibrations of grief, loathing,
Walk away from me.
I know, and despair were so strong that Hades couldn't help but go toward them. And when he finally found their source, a feeling of deep sadness overcame him.
Come back.
He will. He was in what was left of a dark forest, now blackened with ash and soot. The only thing alive was a single apple tree, the green leaves and red apples showing vividly within the black landscape. When I'm done. It reminded him of the apple tree in the Odd Sisters' back garden, and he realized its significance. He landed on one of the branches, still in his bird form, wondering who could have caused this. Surely it was the witch he had felt through the ether, and he sensed she was no longer of this world. Yet somehow, he hadn't gone beyond the veil either. And then he saw it, the old king and queen's castle, abandoned and overgrown, fallen into disrepair. The Black Forest was situated between the old kingdom and a small hamlet where the dwarfs lived and worked. And he remembered who was responsible for the blight in the forest. He had read about Queen Grimhilda in the Book of Fairy Tales. Hades felt each time he read one of the stories, he learned something new about the Odd Sisters. He wondered if a witch who was queen of this land was capable of such destruction. Then, what would the Odd Sisters do when they learned of their true origins? Would it be as the fates described? Would the sky rain blood? And would the stone angels weep? And then the fates appeared, as if he'd summoned them with his thoughts.
Mommy?
They stood on the black earth, ghostly and frightening. All right. Their mouths moved, but words did not come forth, and their images flickered in and out of view before they became solid and he could hear their warnings. Hades, heed our words. There is a reason you were drawn to this dead place. This forest is imbued with a hate so consuming it destroyed the land and its wielder. The reason you feel connection to the Odd Sisters is because they too are fated to dwell with the dead. It is their fate as well as yours. Though you may be choosing your own path, you will still walk among the dead. Hades' crow feathers were covered in a cold mist, and a chill went through him as he watched the fates disappear. He took off from the lone apple tree and circled above the bleak forest, wondering if it would ever recover as he searched for the Odd Sisters' vibrations. But he was distracted. Something else was calling to him. It wasn't the Odd Sisters. It felt familiar and yet entirely new. Then he saw it, the Forbidden Mountain. I will. And it was just as remarkable seeing it in his own eyes as it had been when he imagined it into being. He flew around his new fortress, looking at the stones covered with green moss, at the raven and crow statues, and the dark beauty of his new palace captivated him. He flew through a window in one of the high towers and down a dark tunnel. He decided it would be easier to navigate in his true form. So he transformed into himself again and followed the vibrations that were calling to him. He felt the same pull he had felt when he was drawn to the Black Forest, and he felt he had to follow it, even though he was losing time and needed to get to the fairylands. The tunnel was pitch black, so he created a flame in his hand and ventured down the long passage that twisted and turned for miles, until he realized the stonework in this part of the cavern was different from the stone in the castle he'd created. It was covered in gray moss rather than green, and he realized the catacombs under his own castle were somehow connected to those of another. And just as he was starting to feel that this passageway was leading nowhere, it opened up into an immense and opulent hall with tall marble pillars and elaborate arched alcoves that contained statues. The stone floor was shrouded in a heavy swirling mist that clung to his robes and chilled him like the mist in the woods.
You can blow him.
In the center of the room was a dead tree.
It, please?
I will. And next to it, a massive and stately statue of the formidable and horrendously cruel witch Mania. He read her name on the plaque at the foot of her statue, and recalled what he'd learned of her treachery in the book of fairy tales. And at once, he knew where he was. All right. He was beneath the dead woods. Bless you. In the dead queen's death chamber, he had made a terrible mistake in allowing himself to be drawn there. The statues of the former queens of the dead looked at him with hollow eyes, reproaching him for entering their domain. Okay. So he bowed to them in reverence. It was not customary for the keepers of the dead to enter one another's kingdoms. Okay. Without being invited, without pomp and circumstance. But he was lord of the underworld, after all. But who were these witches to stand against them?
Cause the time is the right time. I can't think of rhyme. PJ Master, PJ Master, PJ Master, PJ Master. Cause the time is the right time. I can't think of rhyme.
It was as if the queens of the dead heard his thoughts, because the statues began to move, and the one of Mania in the center near the dead tree let out a horrific scream that woke the other statues from their slumber. Blood seeped from the statue of Mania's eyes, while her screams grew louder and shriller, and the walls began to tremble, causing cavernous cracks that birthed thousands of skeletons, which poured into the room and piled at his feet. He looked down at the skulls and bones lying at his feet and smirked.
I like PJ Masks.
Good. Now I see where your daughters get their flair for the dramatic, he said, with a smile he hoped would charm the Wraith Queens. The dead are always welcome here, Lord of the Underworld. Your coming was foretold. Choose your next step carefully, unseen one. You hold the fates of many of us in your hands. I hold the past queens of the dead in the same esteem as my own fates, and they've uttered the same warning. Can your daughters not take their place as queens here? All of my daughters have betrayed me, or are fated to do so in the future. I will not reach out my hand to help them ascend the throne, nor will I ever welcome them beyond the veil.
Where's my pop? Where's my son? Says no pictures in it.
I don't know. Well, maybe if you just told them who they are and let them take their rightful places, you wouldn't have this self-fulfilling prophecy nonsense on your hands. Ever think of that? Hades' head burst into red flames. Even he was surprised by his anger, but the Wraith Queen Mania reminded him of his brother, and the hate he was now feeling for both of them was becoming all-consuming. You stand on the bones of the queens who came before my daughters. You stand in the halls of my mothers and those who attended them. My daughters do not belong here, and neither do you. We are connected in death, Lord of the Underworld, but we are not friends.
Read book. Read book.
Hades felt a sadness within him for the odd sisters. I will when I'm done, sweetie.
When you're done reading book, can you blow bubble?
Yeah, their family had abandoned them, just as his family had abandoned him. Their mother cast them from their rightful place, just as his brother banished him to the underworld.
Where did I get this from?
Me?
No, the book. Did I get it from the bookstore?
No, you got it from me.
No, I didn't.
Oh. He felt a deepening kinship with these strange women and decided he would do whatever it took to help them. Then I shall take my leave of you, great queen, and let you rest in peace. He bowed just as he would expect her to do if she were visiting his realm. And I promise never to enter the dead woods uninvited again. See that you never do, Lord of Darkness, said the miserable queen, as she and the other statues slowly took their places of rest once more. It was all so disturbing. When I'm done reading, Joe. Knowing these were the Odd Sisters' true family, and he wondered how much of these Wraith Queen's attributes resided within Lucinda, Ruby, and Martha. Hades shook his head as he left the chamber, knowing full well he was more powerful than the Wraith Queens, but he didn't want to waste his time or energy by starting a war with the Queens of the Dead. He needed to save that for Zeus. As he made his way back through the catacombs, he let his mind drift to the last time he saw his brother. It was at Hercules' birth celebration. He hadn't wanted to think of it. He kept pushing it from his mind, even though it was the very thing that had brought him to the many kingdoms to ask the Odd Sisters for help. He couldn't help but think of it now. He remembered standing at the gates of Mount Olympus before he made his way to the party. He was struck by how different he felt while on Olympus. It was so open, so full of light, and surrounded by stunning nimbus clouds. He just stood there, breathing deeply and enjoying the space around him. He felt free when he was on Olympus. In the underworld, he was confined and anxious. The sulphurous air choked him and made the walls close in on him.
You're gonna read book to me.
I will, sweetie. He wanted to look up and see clouds, golden and pink, and to breathe the fresh air, and he wanted someone to talk to who wasn't dead. Hades took his time that day, making his way to the highest point of Olympus, where he knew he would find his brother and the other Olympians celebrating the birth of Hercules. He loved walking the winding path that took him up and around the beautiful realm. When he reached the top, he walked into the party, which was already in full swing. All the gods and goddesses were in attendance. Zeus greeted him, grinning with everything but his eyes. That's how he was. He would flash that smile while scanning Hades with a suspicious look in his eye. And it all went as Hades expected. Zeus was annoying, and Hades was snide. Zeus made jokes at Hades' expense, and everyone laughed. So Hades left with a renewed hatred for his brother. But before he could make his way back to the underworld, he heard Zeus calling after him. He had followed Hades out so they could talk alone. "What is this all about, Hades? Inviting us to dinner?" asked Zeus. No longer needing to put on a show for the other Olympians, no more pretense of joviality or a friendly sibling jibbing. "I don't know, Zeus. Maybe it was an olive branch, or perhaps I had a temporary loss of my senses," said Hades, not even wanting to look at his brother. He was done. He wanted to leave, but Zeus kept talking. "Everyone knows food consumed in the underworld renders the visitor an occupant," said Zeus. "You don't honestly expect us to believe you weren't trying to trick us the same way you did with Persephone?" "You're right, Zeus. I was trying to trick you." Hades was being sarcastic. "Oh, the boogeyman Hades was trying to trap the great and powerful Zeus in the underworld. As if you didn't make the laws or have the power to change them at will. We both know you didn't want to come." "No, I didn't. Look at you. You've changed. You're hideous. No wonder you had to trick someone into being your wife. You've become a monster, Hades. You're evil, bitter, and cruel. And it's been by your design. Watch your back, brother. Next time you hear from me, it won't be an invitation to dinner. It will be a declaration of war." Hades sighed, trying to banish the memory of that conversation from his mind, trying to root himself back in the many kingdoms. He was angry with himself for being foolish enough to think that after all this time, he could invite his brother over for dinner, and they'd have a little chat and work things out. It was madness to think they'd ever be friends again, if they ever had been. He didn't care for either of his brothers, really. But Poseidon was another story, one that he found in Ursula's story in the Book of Fairy Tales. Although Poseidon was called Triton there, a story that didn't surprise Hades one bit. Both of his brothers valued beauty over everything else. Well, almost everything else. The thing they both valued most was power. It had become clear to Hades that Zeus didn't want him on Olympus, offending everyone with his hideous visage. Zeus would rather exile his own brother to rot with the dead, to become putrid and foul. His brothers no longer loved or valued him. They saw him as a monster. When he allowed himself to admit that it hurt him deeply, he felt more certain than ever that his decision to take over Olympus and cast his brother Zeus into the underworld was the right path. The only way forward now was war, and he would do whatever it took to win it.